I was going to say I'm not the stereotypical person, but when you get to the real truth of Tourette's, there is no stereotypical person.
Hey everybody, it's Ben. Episode 11 already of the Tourette's podcast. Thanks for being here, especially if you're new to the podcast and what we're doing. Feels like a good moment to reintroduce the show since we do have a good number of new listeners within the past few weeks. So my name is Ben, and I have Tourette Syndrome, and every week, every Friday, I put out an episode where I interview somebody else somewhere else in the world who has Tourette's as well. And we talk about how we go about it, really. You know, like what our tics are, when we first notice them, when other people notice them, social situations, you know, all of that, how that's influenced our decisions and how we carry ourselves and deal with it all. Well, this is a great episode to listen to for so many reasons. Our guest is Dave Ross, and he's a straight shooter, very smart, great with words, great with advice. He's got a very young child, so Tourette's is on his mind from that angle too. He's got a lot of wisdom on social situations, professional situations. We talk for a bit about being in high school and what the Tourette dynamic meant at that time in our lives. He's got some excellent points about accessibility in tech design, and there's a really interesting visual way that he manages his tics. So that's on this episode of the podcast. Quick note that I've got an update from Jason Grant from episode 10, and a couple other things too that'll be right after we talk with Dave. So let's get right to it. Could you state your name and the general part of the world you live in? And not that I want your profession to be your identity, but just kind of generally what you do.
Sure. I'm Dave Ross. I'm from Somerville, Massachusetts, which is about 20 minutes north of Boston if the traffic is good, just kind of on the other side of the river. Let's see. And you're right. You know, I try not to define myself in terms of my career, but it's kind of hard to avoid. I've been programming computers since I was 6 years old. And now I work as director of engineering for a web design, development, user experience, accessibility, kind of a full service online publishing agency called 10up. So that's been fun. I'm one of 4 directors of engineering there.
And so when you said you got your start at age 6, I mean, so was that the early 1980s, and what brought you to computers at such a young age?
That would have been 1982, yeah.
Well, so what was the connection there?
My second grade teacher, Miss Tolman, brought a Apple II computer into the classroom.
Yeah.
And this was the 1980s, and everybody had to learn programming, especially kids. Mm-hmm. And she had been taking night school classes at the community college. And she wanted to show off what she had done for her homework, which she put the floppy disk in, turned it on. It did all the grinding disk drive noises that Apple IIs are so famous for.
Yeah.
And up popped an ASCII art picture of R2-D2. And it played the Star Wars theme song on that little that little beeper side. Yeah. And I have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, life-changing.
So I went to the library. I got every kid's programming, because it was the 80s. There were all these books for kids to learn programming. And I just started. I didn't have a computer then. So I would write programs out in paper, in pencil. And, I'd kind of run them in my head and, oh, okay, that's not going to work right. And then I mowed lawns and I washed dishes, and every birthday or Christmas I asked for money, and I saved it up until I got a Commodore 64 in 3rd grade. And that was kind of the start for me.
Yeah, that's where we got, or at least with me and my family. My dad is a huge computer nerd, and we had a Commodore 64, then a Commodore 128, and was very close to computers around the same age. I'm a few years younger than you, but when I was 5, 6, 7, I mean, that's when I was really kind of messing around and discovering. I think we had a word processor called Galaxy. And I think just the thrill of typing stuff on a computer and just seeing your sentences show up on the screen, then the fact that you could print it out with the dot matrix, which was right next to it, another, noisy machine, was just an activity. It was just cool. I wanted to get to know it better, and I felt like it was just like a therapeutic zone I could get into.
That it was.
Well, so I gotta ask. I mean, was this before or after you started exhibiting tics?
This was after I started exhibiting tics when I was about 4 years old, which seems to be a pretty common age.
Yeah.
And it was the coughing tic that seems to be everyone's first one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, everyone freaked out. They thought I might be getting a cold or something, and it just never went away. And from there, it was head shaking, kind of popping my neck, shrugging my shoulders.
Yeah.
I've had some verbal tics over the years. Thankfully, they're under control today.
Right.
I would make this a very awkward podcast, but no, that's how it started out, and it's been hard. I mentioned in our email conversations that I wasn't diagnosed until I was 22 years old, which made growing up with Tourette's very awkward.
Yeah,
nobody knew why I did any of this. And I certainly didn't. I knew I couldn't control it. I knew I got these urges that said I had to make this noise or do this movement, or else that this feeling, this pressure wouldn't go away. And I tried expressing that to people, and especially my parents. The reaction I got was, you could control it if you wanted to.
Right.
And it was very difficult from that standpoint. That's probably one reason I'm so concerned about Tourette's awareness these days, is because I want people, especially kids growing up with it, to understand that, no, you can't control it. You might be able to minimize it, but it's part of you. And it's not something that's just going to go away necessarily.
Well, so what were, so pre-diagnosis when you were a kid, but still exhibiting tics, what were interactions like with peers and other kids? And did any of that play into your interest in computers, which is kind of like not necessarily, but at least in the way we're talking about it, is kind of like a solo mission?
Yeah, it really is. I would say that Tourette's itself, in terms of the tics, was never a problem with my peers. They were curious about it. They would ask why I did it. And of course, I didn't have an answer.
Yeah.
Which made it more of a mystery than anything else. And this was the 80s, right? We were all seeing the public service announcements at the end of G.I. Joe and all that, telling us people are different and it's okay if somebody's a little bit different and do weird things.
Wow, look at that. Don't judge people till you give them a chance.
Because there's a chance you could be wrong. Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe.
So, the kids were more curious than anything. My favorite memory related to Tourette's growing up is, oh God, I hope this guy isn't listening. In eighth grade, when I was graduating eighth grade, the seventh graders put together a book of, memories of the eighth grade class. There were only 5 of us in my school. And each of them had to write what they saw us becoming in the future. And my best friend at the time, Ed, he was in charge of writing mine. And he had, Dave is going to be some super programmer somewhere working with the latest technology and living in Phoenix, Arizona for some reason. He never had an explanation why.
Right.
Twitching at various geometric shapes. And I'm like, I have no idea what that means. He's like, I don't either. You don't know why you do it. That seemed as good a reason as any.
Huh. Fair enough, I guess.
Yeah. And, even in high school, dating, it was never a problem with dating. I would just, tell the women I was dating that I don't know why I do this. It's just a part of me. And it was always kind of understood that, okay, that's one of Dave's little quirks. And in college, it was never a big deal. But again, that's just the tic aspect. And as I've gotten older, I'm starting to understand there's more to Tourette's than the tics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would certainly say that there's a degree of social awkwardness that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I attribute it to being a nerd. And that really wasn't the case. It was, I didn't know how to interact with people.
Yeah.
Maybe that was part of being, a nerd and having geeky hobbies. A big part of it probably was that Tourette's brain that thinks a little bit differently, and just the awkwardness of not understanding myself that well. I've come to understand the rage that comes with Tourette's, that kind of blind rage where you flip into kind of beast mode. Mm-hmm. And I certainly remember instances in grade school where kids would figure out they could just get me to go off on nothing. And they would take advantage of it. But yeah, looking back, I didn't even know that was, that was related to my tics back then. It was just a personality quirk. Now that I've got a better idea of the big picture, it's certainly all coming together.
Yeah, that's interesting. What you said about the social awkwardness part of it. I mean, I've definitely always felt that way. And sometimes I feel like if I'm doing well in a social situation, if I'm being kind of socially fluent, I kind of feel like I'm acting like somebody else in a way. Like I'm not necessarily just kind of being myself. I've kind of adopted the mannerisms of somebody else who might be better at navigating a certain social situation based on how I've read it.
Well, they call it code switching, right? It's when I'm hanging out with my buddies, I'm certainly really casual and laid back. When I'm on a podcast like this, I'm putting a little more thought into what I'm saying. I'm sitting straight up in my chair, which is weird for me. I do public speaking, right? I go to these techie conferences and I give presentations on programming, and there I'm perfectly poised and presented. I've got my blazer on and giving a talk, and it's code switching, right? In different environments, you act a little bit differently. I think as somebody with Tourette's, you probably have a little more awareness of it, though.
Oh, yeah.
You're aware of how your body exists in space, how you're moving, certainly how you're talking and presenting yourself. I totally get that, but it's everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, to some degree, we're all putting on different costumes when we talk to people.
Oh, absolutely.
And in different situations, we all are different people. But yeah, it's definitely something I've had to be aware of personally is, existing in space and, the tics that I do, any kind of noises I make, how those might be perceived by people. It's all part and parcel of having this syndrome.
Absolutely. The hyper awareness, I think, is really kind of where I was going of, like what else am I doing? Or, sometimes I'm not always aware when I tic, and there's not the kind of thing like, oh God, I got a tic coming up. I mean, sometimes I'm just doing it. There are times where my better half will kind of like rib me, in a friendly, understanding way, but she'll kind of point it out to me when I'm kind of, on a roll with my tics, and I don't necessarily look like I'm conscious of the fact that I'm doing it. And I kind of worry about that in public sometimes. I worry about it in my workplace. And I think what I'm personally trying to build up to is, why am I worried? Who is it going to kill? It's maybe a little bit different, but I'm also, I'm 37 now, but even if I was 16, so it's the kind of thing where I didn't own it when I was younger. I didn't, bring it up as like, okay, if you notice something, here's what it is. But what kind of, I don't want to use the word emboldened, but like what got you to the point where you were comfortable kind of bringing it up with people? It may be kind of a weird question, but.
Yeah, that is kind of a weird question because it doesn't come up that often. I'm usually the one who has to bring it up.
Yeah.
I've certainly had situations like a gal I was dating in college, her sister-in-law, little 7 or 8 year old girl, asked me one time, "Why do you shake like that?"
Yeah.
But that's really one of the rare times in my life somebody has actually brought it up. And even the other day, I was on a subway platform here in Boston, and there was a guy ticking near me, and nobody was paying attention to him. It's just something that happens. And certainly Massachusetts in general is a very liberal state. We're all very accepting and very tolerant. But I think people were mostly concerned about him falling off the side of the subway platform than being afraid of him ticking.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it hasn't really come up for me much. Yeah. I think what's emboldened me to kind of, be more accepting of it, more open about it is honestly, it's Facebook. It's joining these Facebook groups for people with Tourette's and parents of kids with Tourette's. And I got to say, what breaks my heart is hearing these parents talking about their kids that are starting to show symptoms. They're concerned about their kids being accepted. They're concerned about their kids finding love, finding careers, being able to drive. That one breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I personally have never had trouble driving. I know there certainly are people with Tourette's who do have trouble with it. But there's people worried about their 5-year-old kid, will they ever be able to drive? And I think that's a little premature there.
Yeah.
And so I think by me being open about it, having a successful career, having a relationship, everything, I want to be out there kind of as an example of what you can be. I'm certainly no Tim Howard, but I'm somebody who has Tourette's oh God, I have Tourette's, but it doesn't have me.
Yeah,
to borrow a phrase.
Well, no, I love that because you're right. I mean, if there is too much of a kind of a fear put on young kids, whether it's something that they observe for themselves or is something that is kind of put on them by their caretaker or the person who wants to keep them safe, that will impact the kind of adult they become. So it's really important to have these really positive examples. And example almost sounds like it's some sort of exception. It's not. It's so many people I talk to are just for this podcast they're just doing their thing. They just happen to have Tourette's and they can function. They're successful. But it's really important for people to see that story versus what's commonly portrayed. And what's commonly portrayed are real people too who have Tourette's. But
oh, absolutely. And outside for people within the community, we certainly do have good examples to follow. In popular media, we're still fighting the stereotypes.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of this too, is I'd love to be out there and just kind of show, here's somebody going through real life dealing with it. I don't have coprolalia. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I was going to say I'm not the stereotypical person, but when you get to the real truth of Tourette's, there is no stereotypical person.
That's the perfect way to say it.
It's just Hollywood has latched onto this idea of, here's what somebody with Tourette's is.
Yeah.
And it gets frustrating.
Well, so how do you find yourself creating awareness?
Probably the biggest way for me is I'm just being open about it, especially on social media.
Yeah.
Being a geek, that's where I spend a lot of time, probably way more than I should, between Facebook, Twitter, and now Mastodon. I try to be open about the fact I have it. I retweet interesting articles. I've recently become interested in online accessibility, which is really interesting, making websites and other, digital properties able to be understood and used by people with different conditions. I don't want to say disabilities, but that's basically what it is. It's people with accessibility concerns, color blindness, physical impairments, that sort of thing. I think, being somebody with a neurological condition like this, I have kind of a unique perspective where it's not just an academic challenge to me. It's something I actually physically have to deal with, especially being a programmer.
Yeah.
My favorite example of that is the Facebook app on the iPhone, at least. If you shake it, it says, "Oh, do you want to report a bug? Are you frustrated? Are you shaking your phone out of anger?" Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I did an arm tick, and
totally happened to me too.
And, it's kind of one of those things the programmer probably didn't even think about it, but it's an actual accessibility issue for somebody who has, and it's low consequence, right? Something more, I don't want to say it was a big consequence, but there's a pinball game on the iPad that I love, Pinball Arcade. Mm-hmm. And if you shake the iPad, that's the same as nudging the pinball machine, right? For the younger listeners, there used to be this thing called pinball. And it was an actual physical ball moving around a big box with flippers. And your grandparents can tell you about it. And, if you nudge the machine, literally nudge it, it'll affect how the ball moves in space. And they simulate that on the iPad by you shaking the iPad side to side. Well, somebody with a movement disorder, whether it's Tourette's, whether it's Parkinson's, anything like that, they're going to be moving the pad anyway. And that kind of thing, I really want to raise awareness to that. It's something I'm starting to explore. There's no real research on it, so I'd love to get some kind of research done and do some presentations at conferences to get other people in the digital space thinking about it.
Yeah, it's funny because I haven't directly had these thoughts, but I've definitely had that experience where I'll have like a kind of like a flick of the hand type tick, and it tells my iPhone, is that would you like to undo your last command or what you typed or something like that, and it's kind of it's just like one of these like miniature frazzlements in the day. It's not a huge deal to me, but if it's someone who there's a functionality issue that, just like you said, that people who have it maybe more severely, then their interface or their experience or their ability to access something that's really pretty vital in terms of kind of getting around technologically in this day and age. I mean, that's really huge. I'd never had a direct thought like that, but that's kind of been in the back of my mind is just having experienced that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and everything we do is online these days, from dating. Oh, thank goodness, I missed a lot of that. Everybody's on Tinder now.
Yeah.
I met my wife on Yahoo to kind of date our relationship there.
Oh, yeah.
Job hunting. I work online.
Yeah.
I work from home for 100% remote company, which is wonderful. We're able to hire the best people from around the world, wherever they live. We'll go to them basically instead of the other way around. But being able to use digital technologies, it's essential to my, being able to have a career.
Let me backtrack a little bit. So you were diagnosed in your 20s. What led up to that? Like, what was the decision to go see the doctor, or neurologist, or whatever kind of doctor you saw? Like, what's the kind of narrative building up to that?
Yeah. So all through my childhood and my adolescent years, my parents, they never thought it could be a neurological condition. They always referred to it as my nervous habits. And they would tell me I could stop if I wanted to. I would be punished.
Yeah.
They would try just weird remedies, like they noticed I ticked more when I was playing video games, so they had me turn the contrast down on my monitor for a week to see if that would have, maybe the bright light was causing it.
Huh.
And anything but take me to a doctor for it. And I still don't understand that to this day, except they probably didn't want to, face the idea that something could be wrong with their child.
Right. Yeah.
And I got some strange comments from them over the years, things like, do you want people to think you're retarded? Which really, just stabbed me in the heart. Why don't you?
Yeah.
So fortunately, mid-90s or so, that's when the internet started becoming big. And there were sites like WebMD springing up. And I decided, okay, well, I'm going to go look for what these nervous habits really are. And so I was going to say I Googled. I probably Alta Vista'd or Ask Jeeves,
web crawler,
about nervous habits.
Yeah,
and I took it from there. And fortunately, some other people had used that term too, and that led me to the term tics.
Mm-hmm.
That led me to Tourette's, and finally, I started reading about it around 1997, 1998. And I finally came to the conclusion that this is what I've been facing.
Yeah.
And it was kind of it shocked me. But at that point, I was still on my parents' insurance. I was in college.
Right.
When I graduated and got my first professional job, I got my first health insurance after 90 days. First thing I did was I scheduled a physical and I asked for a neurologist referral.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor actually told me, look, we'll go through the diagnostic criteria here. I'll give you a yes or no. Yeah. And so we went through the checklist and I described a bunch of symptoms from growing up. And he's like, yep, that is a textbook case.
Wow.
He prescribed me a very low dose of Haldol, which, or haloperidol.
Right.
Which, I asked for something to take the edge off because I was just starting my professional career. I was going to visit clients. I didn't want to sit there in a conference room ticking, especially as a 22-year-old guy just starting out his career.
Right.
Everybody's already kind of looking at me going, what is this guy doing here?
Mm-hmm.
So I tried the Haldol. It turned me into a robot.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. Well, not literally, but I was sitting in the car with my favorite music playing and I was just completely indifferent to it. Nothing would make me laugh. Nothing would make me cry.
Yeah.
And that's totally not who I am. I did theater in high school. I love music. It permeates everything I do.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't myself for that week where I tried it. Mm-hmm. And ever since then, I've just sworn off any kind of medication for it. I don't want to lose who I am.
Right.
And if that means I tick, then I tick.
Right.
That's part of who I am too.
Well, so when you were on Alta Vista and going to WebMD, and did you have any ideas in mind of what you say if someone was to diagnose you right then? I mean, did you have any ideas of where this might be headed before you did the hard research?
Well, of course not. I mean, Tourette Syndrome, that's the one where people swear all the time. That wasn't me.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that goes back to that Hollywood, presentation of it.
Yeah.
I had no idea it would lead in this direction. I had no idea it would be neurological. I thought it was some kind of psychological thing. I really had no basis, no real background to figure out what was going on. It was a total mystery to me. And that's probably why it took a couple years to find out about it, because I had to go down all these little garden paths and eventually end up at the right websites.
So I have sort of a different background, but I've talked to other people who it was the same thing, that tics were a commanding feature in their life. But when it came to them just kind of wondering what they had, I think they just self-diagnosed as it was just a quirk of who they were. And, maybe there was something else hiding in there, but Tourette's was never on the menu because of their own misunderstanding of it. And then being diagnosed with it later on, the first thought is like, no way. It's just like, that's not this.
I told myself that my body had decided I was too weak, and this was my brain trying to get me to do exercise.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't know where that idea came from, but I mean, the things you tell yourself when you have no understanding of what's making you do this. And that's another reason I'm so interested in getting awareness to this disorder too, is I just want people to, maybe there is someone else out there in the same situation I was in.
Yeah.
They're not diagnosed. They have no idea what Tourette's really is. Maybe they can look at someone like me or, hey, listen to your podcast and hear all the other people you're interviewing and say, hey, wait, that is me.
Yeah.
And that would be so nice to bring that kind of awareness into someone's life.
So what you said earlier about Tourette's being more than just tics and you not wanting to kind of get away from who you are, sort of in addition to that, what else do you... So for example, I'm not a good sleeper. A lot of people with Tourette's are not. When I was a little kid, I never slept. And even to this day, I kind of don't want to. There's always something I want to be doing. There's always something I want to work on. You mentioned music. I'm always kind of writing a melody in my head, and so I'm always just activity prone, I guess. Do you have similarity with that?
Oh, that's the Tourette's. I thought that was just being a crazy dreamer.
Of course.
No, I actually sleep very well when I can. I mean, I do have a toddler.
Yeah.
So sleep is kind of a premium.
Yeah.
But no, I'm the exact same way. As soon as I lay down in bed, I get ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's unavoidable. I don't know if that's part of the Tourette's or what, but I put on ambient music, and usually that gets me to sleep in about half an hour.
Yeah.
So usually I'm pretty good there. It's just the rest of the day. It's that feeling of restlessness. I don't want to be sitting there watching TV. There's laundry to do. There's, snow to shovel, take the garbage out.
Right.
I don't know if that's Tourette's necessarily, but it's that general feeling of restlessness, needing to be up, needing to be moving. So I totally relate to that.
And so regardless, like ambient music will kind of help you it'll get you in the mode to sleep. Are there other managements that you have introduced in your life? Medication not being something you want to do. And I'm the same way. I feel like it affects me too negatively to be attracted to medication. But are there any other managements you do in terms of Tourette's?
Yeah. This is going to sound a little weird and new agey, but so was I when I was diagnosed. So that kind of goes hand in hand. What I do is, if you're familiar with the ideas of chakras, right? You've got these different sort of energy spheres within your body. Yeah. And that's kind of where this came from. To get a little new agey here, I picture, from the center of my brain where all these tics are originating from, there's a ball there. And there's a kind of the geek side of me is coming out now. There's a wire running from that ball to my heart where there's another ball, another chakra, and then straight down from there into the ground. And, if you know how the electrical wiring in your house works, the ground wire on any electrical outlet literally goes to about a 3 or 4 foot metal rod in the ground underneath your house, right? Lightning is a good example. Lightning always wants to go to ground.
Right.
The earth is a big conductor and a big battery, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking that energy from wanting to tick, and I'm kind of channeling it down into the ground that way. And a lot of meditation people will talk about grounding and centering, and that's really all I'm doing. This is just easier for me to visualize.
Yeah.
And so when I'm in a situation where I can't tick, like I spend most of my day on video calls working as a remote worker.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm in a situation like that, that's exactly what I'm doing is I'm taking all that energy, I'm pushing it into the ground, or I'm kind of storing it somewhere. And then when the call is over or I have a moment, I can turn off the video camera, then I can tick and let it all out. But for the most part, it's kind of meditation. It's kind of a variant of CBIT that I've heard is very effective in treating tics.
Right.
I've certainly never gone through it professionally, but the fundamentals are basically the same, and I've heard it's very effective. And that, to me, sounds like a better way to deal with it than loading people up with medication that change their personality or might have other side effects. I got to say, I'm really worried when I hear these parents talking about giving their kids medical marijuana or cannabis oil. I see that all the time on Facebook. And I worry about, I'm certainly, not anti-cannabis by any stretch,
right?
But I worry about going to lengths like that in order to make the tics disappear. I almost think that's more for the parents than for the kids. And I worry about any side effects I might have for growing young brains. There's certainly been research that, THC can affect the formation of an adolescent's brain. That's why when we talk marijuana legalization, it's always for 18 and up or 21 and up, because it has been proven to have effects on teenage brains. And I really get worried when I hear about people wanting to give things like that to their kids. And I think these kind of CBIT or medication-based approaches can go a long way in. They're never going to eliminate the tics, but they're going to help control them in certain situations, at least until you're able to get into a place where you can let them loose.
Right. Right. So I guess overall, in general, you kind of see a better direction being acceptance of tics and more integration of tics in your life versus trying to stamp them out.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's part of who I am. Since I've been 4 years old, I'd actually feel weird if they were 100% gone. I don't think I'd be me at that point anymore.
Yeah.
So if I can control them and still, being able to function in society, then that's fine. But I'm not going to take any medication or anything like that that's going to risk, again, changing my personality, making me unhappy with myself.
So your thought process with the grounding piece, is that something you shared on your Facebook groups or communities? And have you found other people who do similar things, like in terms of any sort of like cognitive or mental or even using the new agey word, kind of ritualistic stuff? Have you run into that or?
I've run into people who use meditation, kind of a guided meditation to kind of calm your lower your blood pressure, calm your mind. Nobody with that particular kind of visualization, right. But there are people out there using meditation to, kind of calm themselves down and give them that feeling of control over their body. One part of, meditation practice is to control your breathing. Yeah. And once you're controlling that, that's something so vital and fundamental to the human, to life. Once you've got that under your intentional control, then controlling your body just kind of comes along with it.
And so earlier you mentioned an observation where when you were a kid and you were playing video games, your tics seemed to kind of chirp up. Are there other quote unquote triggers that you've noticed?
It's not that the video games were the trigger, and that's something too I've noticed in, coming from parents with, kids with Tourette's, is this idea that there's stimuli that trigger it.
Yeah.
TV, video games, certain types of music. From my experience, and I can't speak for everyone, of course, from my experience, it's not the activity itself. It's getting absorbed into it where you're not paying attention to your tics, right? I would get really into video games, and especially those challenging, 8-bit Nintendo era games where if you miss something by a split second, you're dead. You only got 3 lives to begin with.
Right.
I would get so wrapped up in that I wouldn't pay attention to my tics. And I think that was misinterpreted as the video games causing the tic. No, the tics are always there. I didn't care about hiding them. Right. I was sitting alone in my room. I didn't even think anybody was watching me. And I think, there's no real, I haven't really noticed any kind of stimuli that cause it. Certainly right before I go to bed, I kind of have to go through my catalog. My brain wants me to shake my head, shrug my shoulders, do the horse whinny, stretch my legs out.
Yeah.
Kind of got to go through everything once before I can feel calm and comfortable for bed.
Yeah.
But there's no real stimuli that cause it other than maybe, again, being focused, which unfortunately is most of my life, having to stare at a computer screen.
Right. Yeah. Well, do you find other grooves or zones that you can get into where your tics feel maybe excused or you've satisfied yourself in a certain way? So for me, it's kind of hard to pin because sometimes, so I used to be a news reporter back in the day, and when I was on deadline and I was feeling that anxiety and stress, and I was just crunching away on the keyboard, I was ticking like crazy because I just felt this sense of pressure, and I felt like, who knows? But there are other times where I busy myself, or if, for example, if I'm podcast editing, which is something I really enjoy doing personally, I just feel very zeroed in and focused in. And if I'm ticking, I don't notice myself doing it. Do you kind of have those zones that you can get into?
Absolutely. One of my other hobbies is I'm a runner, which everybody in Boston is, right? We got the Boston Marathon here. Mm-hmm. So I do 5Ks, 10Ks, and half marathons. And I noticed when I'm just going for kind of a casual jog, I don't tic.
Right.
But once I start pushing myself, I try and, beat my personal best time, or I'm running in the rain or something that's kind of a challenge to me. Yeah. Then I do start ticking. And frankly, I don't care, because all I care about is that time on my watch that tells me I'm going to beat that record, or I'm going to, finish this in a decent amount of time.
Right.
So then the horse whinnies come out, and the crack in my elbows and the shake in my head. And you know what? The running community is one of the most accepting communities I've ever seen. There's great, there's a great podcast out there, 300 Pounds in Running, talking about people with weight issues, still going out and running marathons. Mm-hmm. It's certainly, very few people care about color or physical, size or conditions or anything. You look at people doing marathons in wheelchairs, and people on the sidelines are cheering them on. It's just such an amazing, beautiful community. And so being a runner in a race, having Tourette's, it's no big deal. I think people understand that. They understand I'm in the zone. They understand I'm pushing myself physically. And I think they get the sense that kind of comes along with it.
So this it kind of sounds like a jump, but the question kind of popped in my head when you were talking about meeting your wife on Yahoo. Do you remember what the early conversation was like with her when you kind of introduced it, and how she reacted?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because our first date was 2 days or 3 days before I started that job that got me the insurance that got me diagnosed.
Huh.
So we kind of went on that journey together. Before that, she had seen me tic. I think I might have even mentioned it in one of our early emails. Mm-hmm. I said, I have no idea why I do this. It's just kind of one of my quirks. And she just kind of went with it.
Right.
I certainly, if you have a good personality and you're a good person, I think a lot of people are able to look past a lot of things like this.
Yeah. It's
only the really superficial people who worry about it. They worry about how it makes them look. Mm-hmm. My wife and I have had that discussion too, now that we have my son. And I told her there's a good chance he will have Tourette's.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't care. You have it. You're fine.
Right.
I think her concern is about, me being a good husband and a good provider and a good father. And,
right.
Even when we were dating, just being a good partner. And, the Tourette's was just kind of minimal. And finally having a name for it. And I I think, seeing the joy I had when I finally had a diagnosis, I think that certainly helped things, but it's never really been an issue for us. She's certainly expressed at times that it's frustrating, somebody's shaking the bed with all these ticks, right before falling asleep. Memory foam mattresses are a miracle, I gotta say. They kind of kill any kind of movement like that.
Yeah.
Sitting and watching TV, sometimes I might have a tick storm or two, and that can get frustrating at times, but it's not all the time. And she's pretty understanding and accepting about it. And I would say any relationship I've had since high school has been that way.
Yeah.
It's a quirk of mine, and people just kind of go with it.
Well, I love what you said about your kid. And I mean, if there is a diagnosis, there's immediately going to be the level of support that maybe not everybody has in terms of understanding it, or the mystery isn't going to be there and the support system will be there. So, I mean, for any parents who are listening, this might require a little bit of reiteration, but just in terms of evaluating and going about it and kind of walking them or guiding them through the diagnosis and being a positive force versus, someone who maybe wants to let's just see what we can do to control this. As a parent, what's the practical advice?
The practical advice, this is a tough one. It's something I've given some thought to, because obviously if, my son's about to turn 2, so about 2 years from now, he might start showing the first signs if he has it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something I've been thinking about. I think in terms of being supported, a lot of it needs to come from them. I think and then again, I can only speak from my own experience. The things that set me off the most, that made me tick the worst, that made me the most frustrated, were people telling me to stop it.
Yeah.
Doing these weird interventions that were supposed to stop me from doing it and just made life more stressful, brought more attention to it.
Yeah.
I think if we're a lot more accepting, a lot more calm about it, then I think that the kids growing up with it, they're going to be less stressed out. They're not going to tick as much from that. I think when we're constantly dragging kids in front of doctors, popping pills in their mouths or these essential oils or whatever, I think that kind of sends a message that there's something wrong with them. And I don't think Tourette's is something that's wrong with any of us. It's just a quirk of who we are. And certainly when we're in public, it's very helpful to be able to control it. I think finding, techniques for dealing with it, for not eliminating it, but controlling it like I've done with my meditation, that certainly is helpful. And I certainly would teach my son to do that. But I think all this worrying and this constant need to go to doctors and everything, I can only imagine that makes things worse for the kids. And I worry about when they grow up, what their self-esteem is going to feel like, because I know that constant message that something was wrong with me certainly stayed with me until I was about 40. And I'm just now starting to come to terms with the fact that I'm pretty awesome. I don't know if anybody else knows. And I'm a good person and I'm worth being with. And I've got friends, I've got a family here. People love me. And that's something I think everybody needs to feel. And I don't want these kids growing up with this feeling that there's something wrong with them that needs to be controlled, that needs to be fixed. That's terrible. It's a terrible message to send to people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, what you said about, just being at the point in life and kind of realizing the actual person you are, Tourette's or not, I mean, it's so important. And I was that person. I'm just crawling out of it to where I feel kind of, like I'm ready to. I've always embraced it for myself. And at any point in my life, if someone had asked me, if Tourette's was curable and you could have been cured as a baby, would you have taken it? I mean, is that, and the answer is always no. Because it is completely woven into the kind of person I am. And Tourette's or not, I like where I am in life, but I had really, really supportive parents. They were always there for me. And I definitely went through the gamut of medication, including Haldol, and, just nothing seemed to do, more good than bad. So it's like I was cool when I was a kid, but then I get into my teenage years and I'm like, okay, I know I'm a good person, but society just isn't mature enough to handle Tourette's. And I feel like there is, as far as viewpoints go, I feel like, God, I mean, yeah, I am kind of made to feel like there's something wrong with me, or I'm just kind of the laugh. And whether or not that was true, I mean, it could have been, I could have brought it up and everybody would be like, oh, I don't care. And that probably would have been the case. But it was just, I think this fear of like, is it going to be social suicide to be it? And I always think back to me just walking through high school, and what if I had owned it? What if I had made it kind of the quirky thing about myself? And then they can see me as the individual outside of that who's able to manage it, and that ends up making it okay. And it's just these weird forks that I always ended up taking the more protected path, I guess. And it's just, I love hearing the way you talk about it, and the support that you can give to somebody just in the form of there's nothing wrong with you. This is something that you got, and we can, but it's not about stamping it out. It's about kind of having it in your life. And management almost sounds like it's a negative word in a way, but just kind of weaving it into yourself so it's a part of you and it's not something that's wrong with you.
Oh, exactly. And, that takes a lot of the stress off, and it makes it's a wonderful feedback loop. It makes the management that much easier.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned high school too. One of the things that made high school the most tolerable for me was that realization that it's only 4 years out of your life.
Yeah.
And, we didn't have Facebook back then. So I'm just now reconnecting with a lot of people I was in high school with. And I'll tell you what, none of them remember me ticking. None of the people I went to grade school with. I'm in touch with people I was in third grade with.
Right.
That's not what they remember about me.
Right.
They remember the kid with the Commodore 64 that would come over, play video games. I loved Weird Al music. That's what they remember about me. Yeah. The Tourette's is the thing nobody cares about. And even if it was, it's when you're in high school, it feels like that is eternity and that is the entire world. And it's really not. People go off in their own directions. My best friends in high school, I haven't even talked to in years. It's really that time to figure out how to deal with these things like Tourette's and other different facets of yourself, whether it's sexuality, gender identity, neurological disorders, any kind of social awkwardness, anything about yourself. It's the time to experiment, make mistakes, fall flat on your face, make enemies, make friends. And after 4 years, nobody's going to care.
Right.
And they're going to go off to college or start a career, whatever. And you're going to be around completely different people with all the knowledge and experience that you've gained over those 4 years. And I think coming to terms with that really, really helps. Certainly helps with dating, too. I made a lot of mistakes there, too. Learned a lot of valuable lessons. But, that's another thing, too. Maybe not Tourette's related, but just life in general. Right. To any teenagers out there listening, it's I totally understand what you're going through. Just remember it is temporary. And, that things like Tourette's, that's not what people are going to remember about you, probably. It's what you do. It's how you treat other people. It's what you achieve. It's what you contribute to the people around you.
Dave Ross from Massachusetts, really enjoyed that one. If you follow me on Twitter, the handle is @Tourette'sPod, then you can connect with Dave by way of the tweets that I'm going to put out about this episode. I'll tag him there. But there's a chance some of you already know or interact with Dave via the Facebook groups that he mentioned. Either way, let's talk about this episode, what Dave said. The hashtag is Tourette'sPod, and my handle on Twitter is @Tourette'sPod. So an update on Jason Grant, who you heard last week. We started by talking about his experiences with tardive dyskinesia. But right after that episode aired, he emailed me, he updated me, said that he'd been diagnosed by a new neurologist as having not tardive dyskinesia, but drug-induced Parkinsonism. Go back and listen to episode 10 for context. It's a really great episode. But I also got emails from a couple other people who said it was refreshing to hear about tardive dyskinesia because they said they have it too and they've never heard anybody else talk about it. One of them told me he also has tardive Tourettism, which I'll admit I'm not an expert on. The opposite, actually. But it's really interesting, and if I get permission from the person who wrote me, it could be something interesting to explore. If this sounds vague, we can talk about it outside of this episode or in a future episode. Also want to say thanks to Dylan Frost. He followed up on the part in the last episode where Jason and I are talking about Amazon Smile and setting it up to benefit the Tourette Association or other nonprofits or charities that you want to support. Well, Dylan says this. Thought I'd mention that there's lots of sites out there which people can donate to charity through their purchases. Give As You Live is one that I use here in the UK to donate to Tourette's Action, and it works for a lot of online shops, not just Amazon. Thanks, Dylan, for pointing that out. That's really important. And if anybody else has anything to add to that, please let me know. Thanks for listening. Gosh, every week I feel like at this point, at the end of the episode, I'm supposed to say something here at the end. Don't know. But for all past episodes, head to tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Libsyn is spelled Libsyn. tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Or just make it easy and subscribe on iTunes. Thanks to everybody who's rated the podcast with 5 stars and left a friendly review. That's awesome. It helps the show and it creates confidence. So really appreciate that. You can email me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com. If you want to talk or have something to say about an episode or an idea for a future episode, I'm wide open to that. Thanks again, and we will see you next week. This is Ben.